college football is dropping that bag on guys out of high school, players in the portal. Nobody ever brings up how much Alabama, Georgia, Texas, and Oregon spend on a recruit. But when Miami and USC, God forbid, spend some money on a 5-star recruit, it makes front page news about how much they spent on this guy, how big of a bag they dropped on this dude. When USC got that commitment from 5-star tight end Mark Bowman, it was they gave him Bryce Underwood type money. When Miami got Jackson Cantwell, 5-star offensive tackle, it was they paid him $2 million per season. They outbidded Georgia. When everybody in this sport is spending money on everybody, even teams that you wouldn't think had NIL money or spending NIL money. Think of the worst team in college football on the lowest level. They have NIL money. Yeah, Kent State has money to spend on name, image, and likeness. Hell, I graduated from Florida Atlantic University. They spent $300,000 on their team last year. Everybody in this sport has money, and everybody's throwing it around to assemble the best team possible. People hate on what Miami and USC are doing in recruiting, why they bring up how much they're spending on these 5-star recruits, because they're jealous that these two programs are no longer dead blue bloods. They know that USC is on the rise. They know that the Trojans program has been revitalized by their new general manager, Chad Bowen, and head coach Lincoln Riley. Everybody knows that Mario Cristobal is one of the most relentless recruiters in college football. NIL has re-energized these two at a time dead blue blood programs. So it's no reason to continue to throw in the face how much Miami and USC drop on the recruit. Certain teams have a certain amount that they're willing to invest into a particular player or a certain position. Georgia doesn't need to spend a lot of NIL money on certain guys if they feel it's not justified. That's their prerogative. Miami doesn't have to feel the same. But Miami shouldn't feel guilty for having a bunch of NIL money just because they're rich. Same thing with USC. USC and Miami are the two most hated programs in college football simply because they can outbid anybody. Texas was dropping millions on defensive tackles out of high school and in the portal, but On3, 247 Sports, they never reported on that. None of these college football media outlets ever report on how much certain schools spend unless it's Miami or USC to push this narrative that these programs can only get certain guys because they have a lot of money to throw at them. No, these recruits are coming to USC and Miami because they believe in the vision of both of these programs. USC is locking down the state of California. Miami is able to shut down South Florida. Yeah, a few guys may slip through the cracks here or there, but it's not only because of money. Yeah, money is a large influence in a lot of these commitment decisions, but it's not the end-all, be-all. When these recruits go to a campus, they have to love the coaching staff. They want to make it to the NFL because they know the goal isn't to max out cashing out in college. You also want to max out and get that life-changing money in the NFL. The college money is just to get you through for a few years, help you buy a nice iced out chain, have you driving around in a nice car on campus. But getting into the NFL is when you get that bigger bag. That's when you get that generational money. Georgia has as big as a collective as anybody. If they want to drop $2-3 million on the guy out of high school, they have the ability to do it. So does Alabama. So does Oregon. Hell, Phil Knight has essentially given Oregon unlimited NIL money. I guess it's dried out as of late because I haven't seen Oregon get a lot of commitments lately. But when Oregon was going on their recruiting run last year, Nobody ever mentioned how much money they were spending on these recruits, how much money they were spending on the transfer portal, stealing guys off other teams, which is illegal, by the way. Tampering is illegal. Everything that USC and Miami are getting hated on is perfectly within the confines of the rules. But nobody ever bats an eye when anybody else does it. Hell, Nick Saban was paying guys under the table illegally for years. And yet people want to act like it never happened. Tennessee was paying guys, putting money in McDonald's bags. So why is it that USC and Miami are the only programs when they get a commit, it's only because they threw a lot of money at a guy? Let's stop the hate, because it's rooted in jealousy. A lot of y'all know that USC and Miami are coming for you, and it scares you because you know that your program, your team cannot compete with the amount of money that USC and Miami have to spend. College football essentially is pay to win. It's like Madden Ultimate Team. What are you going to do? Are you going to complain and get mad because you don't have enough money to keep up with USC and Miami? That sounds like a personal problem. Damn, you made it this far and you still haven't hit that like button. You still haven't subscribed. What are you doing? You obviously enjoy the content. Having a tough schedule will not stop Florida from being a playoff contender this year. Anytime the thought of Florida making it to the CFP gets brought up, it's, oh, they have such a difficult schedule. I don't know, like, everybody else in the SEC doesn't have a difficult schedule. Anybody in this conference can lose to anybody on any given Saturday. We saw Ole Miss lose to Kentucky, who was one of the worst teams in the SEC last year. Oklahoma dragged Alabama through the mud and ended their playoff hopes. It doesn't matter how good you are. You can lose to anybody in the SEC. Florida is good enough that they can get right with any team on their schedule. You got DJ Lagway, the most hyped up quarterback in the history of college football. 12 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, never got more hype. He essentially is a top 3 quarterback coming into this season. You got a top 10 offensive line and defensive line with Tyreek Sapp, who eventually will be a potential first-round pick in next year's draft. You got Cormani McClain with a potential breakout season on the way. There's not a single team on Florida's schedule this year that they don't have the ability to beat. The ceiling for the Gators in 2025 is 10-2, possibly making an appearance in the SEC title game. The ceiling for this squad is 8 wins. My prediction for Florida is that they go 9-3 this year. Look, Texas doesn't want that smoke with Florida in the swamp. Playing in the swamp is one of the toughest places to get a win at. Ask LSU, ask Ole Miss what happened last year when they came to the swamp and DJ Lagway and Billy Napier sent them home packing, ending their playoff hopes. Georgia, they got past close between Florida and the Bulldogs this year. Hell, if DJ Lagway never got injured against Georgia last year, Florida probably ends up winning that game. Against Miami early during the season, Florida has to get their lid back on Miami. Miami came into your trap, took over your trap, and embarrassed you. Now you have to pay them back the favor by coming into their trap, although it's not technically their trap because it's not their own stadium, technically. But still, the point is the same. Miami has to lose to Florida this year. It's only right. Florida has a better team than Miami, and to be quite honest with you, DJ Lagway is the difference in Florida overcoming the Canes this year. Just like how Cam Ward was mainly the difference in Miami clobbering the Gators in the swamp last year. LSU and Texas A&M are winnable world games. Texas A&M gets a lot of love in the offseason. They're in a bunch of top 10s, top 15 rankings. When the season rolls around, they never play up to that level of offseason hype. LSU, I got to see it to believe it with Brian Kelly. Same thing for a lot of you folks out there. Tennessee and Ole Miss are mid. These are the 2 most overrated teams in the SEC this year. Tennessee is losing Their best player on offense, the SEC Offensive Player of the Year, in Dylan Sampson. They lose 4 starters on the offensive line. They lose a lot of talent on defense, especially in their secondary. Hell, their best cornerback, who was a first-team All-American, tore his ACL in January. Ole Miss bought their team through the portal last year. All of those portal additions from 2024 are gone. It's not as if Ole Miss recruits like they're Ohio State or Texas or anybody like that. Tennessee and Ole Miss are due for a down season. Florida's schedule is not as hard as what it looks like. Florida has a good enough team that they can get right with anybody on their schedule this year. There's not a single game that Florida doesn't have a chance of being able to win this year when you have DJ Lagway, who is expected to take the infamous Tim Tebow leap. And when that happens, not only is he going to be a Heisman Trophy contender or a Heisman Trophy finalist potentially, but he's going to elevate Florida to a level that they haven't been since the Urban Meyer era in Gainesville. This is one of the top 15, top 13 best teams in college football entering this season. The Florida Gators are not Vanderbilt. They're not Northwestern when we should be scared of who they play. Oh, their schedule is so tough. Alabama's schedule is tough. Oklahoma's schedule is tough. Georgia's schedule is tough. Florida shouldn't be this program where we have to just emphasize how difficult their schedule is. Like, this isn't a program that has history. Like, Florida isn't a program that has several national championships in football. This is a proud program. This is a storied program. So I think that Florida fans should be a hell of offended when you have to hear this nonsense about you could be a playoff team, but your schedule is so tough. So what's the point of paying DJ Lagway all this money? What's the point of giving Billy Napier another season in the swamp if you need an easy path to get to the college football playoffs? If you can't beat a school like Texas, Georgia, LSU, Texas A&M on the road, Ole Miss, Tennessee, your ass don't deserve to be the head coach of Florida, and you don't deserve to be playing in the SEC. When you have that SEC logo on your jersey, on the back of your helmet, it represents something. It represents that you are in the upper echelon of college football. If you can't handle the heat in this conference, you've already lost. So if your whole excuse of Florida not making it to the playoffs is, oh, their schedule's so tough, so everybody needs to have an easy schedule to be a playoff contender? Like we didn't see Georgia go through a gauntlet last year? Come on now, there are no cakewalks in the SEC. There is no duck and no smoke in this conference. Florida is well equipped to handle the rigors of their 2025 schedule. This is a 9-win team with a ceiling of 10, possibly 11 wins if everything goes right, based off how well Billy Napier has recruited and developed talent. This is definitely a playoff contender. Bill Belichick was 22-7 against rookie quarterbacks when he was coaching in the NFL. Can you imagine the unholy things Bill Belichick's defense is going to do to these college quarterbacks this year? They're not going to be able to sleep at night the night before they have to go up against Bill Belichick's defense in Chapel Hill. How he's going to disguise his coverages is going to make it hard for these QBs to make the right reads. A lot of these college offenses now are RPO-based offenses where it's predetermined pre-snap who these quarterbacks are throwing the football to because these receivers are schemed open. Belichick is going to shut that shit down. What Belichick did so well in the NFL that caused rookie quarterbacks to struggle is that he took away their first read all of the time and forced them to have to go through their second and third reads, which is something that you don't see a lot of college quarterbacks be able to do with a high level of consistency. You got quarterback Thaddeus Dixon from Washington out of the transfer portal. He's going to shut down every single team's opposing wide receiver one. When he was at UW last year, he only allowed 47% of the passes thrown his way to be completed. He had a passer rating of 65.7 allowed when he was targeted. He had an interception and 10 pass breakups at UW in 2024. So when you have a lockdown corner like Thaddeus Dixon taking away your number one option, you know what that's going to do for the opposing quarterback? It's going to force them to panic. They're not going to know where to go with the ball, because 9 times out of 10, you don't have a good enough second or third option that can routinely beat Bill Belichick's elite man coverage schemes like he likes to run. So what is that going to do? Either that quarterback is going to panic, take a coverage sack, or he's going to throw a stupid interception just because he doesn't know where to go. Bill Belichick's, the complexity of his defenses, these college quarterbacks are not going to know how to handle that. They're going to have a hard time trying to figure out how to attack Belichick's defense. And a guy like a K. Klubnik, who is expected to be a potential top 10 draft pick next year, he's going to get tested when North Carolina has to play up against Clemson. Because if he doesn't have the ability to have success against Bill Belichick's defense, then how is he ever going to succeed at the next level? The majority of the quarterbacks in the ACC are above average at best, minus a few quarterbacks here or there who are pretty good. But when you look at how easy UNC's schedule is this year, there's not a single quarterback that I can see dominating Bill Belichick's defense. Bill Belichick is the greatest defensive mind in the history of football. There's a reason why he has 6 Super Bowls as a head coach and 2 of them as a defensive coordinator. He has shut down some of the greatest offenses in the history of the National Football League. He shut down the greatest show on turf. He shut down that high-powered offense in the Super Bowl with the Rams, holding them to only 3 points with Todd Gurley and Jared Goff, who were MVP candidates that year. You had Sean McVay, one of the greatest offensive minds that the NFL has seen in this generation. If Bill Belichick can clamp up some of the greatest offenses ever, you don't think he's going to be able to shut down the majority of these collegiate offenses that he's going to be seeing this year? A lot of these offenses, they're just too simplistic to have success against Belichick's defense. He's just too much of a defensive mastermind for any of these offenses to have a success against North Carolina's defense as what they did last year. I can promise you one thing that I know damn sure won't happen. You won't see a single team hanging 70 points on Bill Belichick's defense like how you saw North Carolina giving up last year to James Madison. I guarantee you that. Just because Belichick had a few down years after the retirement of Tom Brady doesn't mean that he forgot how to coach. I'm not worried about his girlfriend, Jordan Hudson, distracting him. Bill Belichick knows how to keep the main thing the main thing. There's a reason why he's the GOAT. He's better than Nick Saban, Dabo Swinney. There is not a single head coach in college football that has the resume that Bill Belichick has. And I peeped that some NC State players had Bill Belichick as their lock screen, talking about some target practice. You don't want to poke the bear with Bill Belichick. And NC State had a really good freshman quarterback last year. He's not going to be looking so good when he has to walk up on that field and he has to throw passes against a Bill Belichick coach defense. It's one thing to look good against Mac Brown's powder puff defense. It's another when you're going against the Lions den. You don't want to poke the bear because you're not going to be ready for when that bear fights back and they're clawing after you and you don't have no bear spray to stop this Bill Belichick defense. A lot of these quarterbacks don't know what they're about to get themselves into until they actually walk up on that field and they take that first snap and they're unable to figure out who to throw the football to when their best wideouts getting clamped up by Thaddeus Dixon and Bill Belichick is throwing all kinds of exotic looks in their faces. Bill Belichick's defense is going to torture college quarterbacks this season. Florida State, coming off the season from hell, has Goliath walking into Doak Campbell Stadium in week 1. If there was any team that you didn't want to play if you was Mike Norvell with your job on the line this year to start this new season, it's the Alabama mother effing Crimson Tide. Alabama versus FSU is your prototypical David versus Goliath matchup. Bama wants to smash ants with a sledgehammer this year and make it to the college football playoffs, coming off a disappointing season, and they're all right. Meanwhile, Florida State, you just want to be a competitive team above all else. And the biggest question for Florida State going into this Alabama opener is, how many stones do you have available to throw at Goliath? Thomas Castanelos, he is the Dollar General version of Kyler Murray. He doesn't have the same arm strength or the same athleticism that Kyler Murray had, but he's not too far off. And if he is as good as what Mike Norvell has made him out to be during this offseason, he can give Alabama's defense a lot of problems, because last year, Alabama's defense struggled against mobile quarterbacks. Lenore Sellers had success against them. Jackson Arnold, the damage that he did on the ground against the Tide was a large reason why Oklahoma pulled off that upset. Alabama, as stacked as what they are on the defense side of football this year, they have a top 5 defense walking into the 2025 college football season. If Thomas Castanelos can get going early with his mobility, it can open things up for the rest of Florida State's offense. Kalen DeBoer, as good as a coach as what he is, he has had tendencies to play down to competition. Last year, when Alabama lost to Vanderbilt and Diego Pavia couldn't be stopped, that was a prime example of Alabama playing down to their competition. And even when he was at Washington, he had a few games that Washington was favored to dominate in, and they won by a pretty thin margin. If Florida State comes out and they can click early, they got the chemistry down with their new patchwork offensive line, and they can take advantage of that home field that they have where you hear that, oh, bro. That damn war chant that Florida State has is so damn annoying. But once you really get that thing going and you keep hearing that, oh, and Florida State's having success, it can rattle any team that is on the road in Doak Campbell Stadium. However, though, I don't see Florida State having enough stones or big enough stones to knock off the Goliath that is Alabama. Look, Alabama is a 12.5-point favorite going into this game. Not only are they going to cover that, but they're going to smash Florida State the smithereens. They have the best secondary in college football. Going up against Thomas Castanelos, if you take away his ability to run and he has to beat you from within the pocket, Alabama's defense is going to feast on him. He's 5'9". So not only is he incredibly undersized, when you have a defensive front as fast and athletic as what Alabama does, he's going to have a hard time seeing open receivers downfield. A lot of his throws are going to come outside of the numbers. He's not going to be able to consistently hit those quick strikes in the middle of the field. And in Florida State, a lot of their projected starters on their offensive line are guys that they got out of the transfer portal, albeit a good amount of these offensive linemen have started a pretty good amount of games at their previous stops, but not a bunch of these guys have played a team to the level of talent that Alabama's going to be walking in with. And normally, when you have a team that doesn't have a lot of experience playing with each other, it normally takes a few games for them to start gelling. Meanwhile, you have an Alabama defensive front that has a lot of experience, a lot of guys returning from last year's team. They should be able to get the upper hand on that FSU transfer portal dependent offensive line. Florida State, is also going to be starting 3 new cornerbacks this season because they lost a good amount of talent at that position to the NFL. They're not going to be able to guard any of Alabama's wide receivers. You got Jeremy Bernard, Isaiah Horton, who you got from Miami out of the portal, and then you got that boy Ryan Williams. Now with him actually having a quarterback that can consistently throw the football with accuracy, Ryan Williams possibly could win the Heisman Trophy this year. And in this game, he probably could end up going off for 175 yards, 2 or 3 touchdowns, and average around 16, 17 yards per catch. FSU doesn't have a cornerback in that locker room that can guard Ryan Williams with their hands tied behind their backs. And FSU just has less chemistry going into this game than what Alabama does. So essentially, with Florida State, you need to play your best football early during this season in this game. You basically have to play this game like you already are in mid-season form. Your margin of error is incredibly small as compared to Alabama. Alabama can afford a turnover or two. You can't. You got to play perfect, fundamentally sound football. Your coaching staff hires have to work out, which I believe they will. Tony White did a really phenomenal job at Nebraska. Gus Malzahn, any running back or dual threat quarterback that you plug into his system automatically turns into gold. But it's tough sledding when you have Alabama walking into your trap in week 1. And Alabama's going to take over Florida State's trap this year. My score prediction for this game is Alabama 42, Florida State 20. And they only get to 20 when Alabama puts the backups in. I'm not trying to hate on Florida State. I said what needed to happen at the start of this segment for you to win this game. But ultimately, you're walking into an onslaught. You're going to have a motivated Alabama team, and you're going to have an offense that has way more consistent quarterback play than what they did last year. If they had Jalen Milroe at quarterback, then this probably could be a little bit of a dogfight for the first 3 quarters. But with Ty Simpson, it's fair to assume that he'll be better than what Jalen Milroe is, only because with how bad Jalen Milroe played at times, you would have thought that Ty Simpson should have gotten some opportunities. In that bowl loss against Michigan, there was a lot of noise about how Ty Simpson should have went in that game to see what he had. But Kalen DeBoer stayed loyal to Jalen Milroe because he didn't want to lose the locker room. Now, Kalen DeBoer has the kind of guys that he wants to run the system that had him a bunch of success when he was at the University of Washington. You also have his tag team partner reuniting with him, that being Ryan Grubb. So Alabama, they're going to walk all over Florida State and Doak Campbell. I'm hoping that I'm wrong and this is a competitive game, but it's going to be tough for Florida State coming out on top in this game or even keeping this thing competitive until the last 15. Hey, man, if you listen to podcasts, check us out on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts from. The JT Sports Podcast is available. Give us a 5-star review if you enjoy. James Franklin is the new Mark Richt of college football. When Mark Richt was at Georgia, all you heard during the offseason was, this is finally the year that Georgia breaks through and wins it all with Mark Richt as their head coach, just to be disappointed at the end of the season. It's the same rinse, wash, and repeat cycle with James Franklin at Penn State. For the last 4 or 5 years, it was supposed to be Penn State's year that they finally take over the Big Ten and they compete for a national title. And that's why I don't buy the hype with James Franklin and Penn State walking into the 2025 college football season. Because the same way people gas up Penn State was the same way folks were always gassing up Georgia under Mark Richt. James Franklin and Mark Richt are the ultimate hype beasts. They are great program builders. When you hire them, within the span of 2-3 years, they're going to have you at a good enough level to where you believe that your team is good enough to win it all. But then you go into the end of every season once it's all over, heartbroken and frustrated, asking yourself, what do we need to finally get over the hump? And what Penn State needs is a new head coach. They need their Kirby Smart, just like how Georgia got their Kirby Smart when they got rid of Mark Richt. And it's going to take the end of this season for Penn State fans and James Franklin defenders to realize this. Look, when Mark Richt was at Georgia, he was official property of Alabama and Florida. He was 1-3 against Nick Saban. He beat Nick Saban his first year at Alabama, and Nick Saban steamrolled him 3 straight times when they matched up against each other. He couldn't beat Florida. He was 5-10 all time against the Florida Gators. Urban Meyer owned him. He was 1-5 against Urban. James Franklin is official property of Ohio State and Michigan. He's 1-10 against Ohio State, and he's 3-7 against Michigan. Mark Richt couldn't beat ranked teams. Mark Richt, his first 7 seasons, he was 25-13 against the top 25. His final 8 seasons in Athens, he went 14-23. James Franklin, though, he says, Mark Richt, you couldn't beat ranked teams? Hold my beer for me, because I'm a lot worse against ranked teams. James Franklin is 13-27 against top 25 foes. And it gets worse when you look at what he does against top 10 teams. Like, Penn State lost to Ole Miss in their bowl game a few years ago with Lane Kiffin. I mean, there were so many similarities to Mark Richt and James Franklin that when James Franklin wakes up in the mirror and he brushes his teeth, he shaves, he sees Mark Richt as his reflection. I don't get how you guys can't see this comparison, but yet you continue to buy into the offseason hype train year after year after year after year with Penn State, just like how Georgia did. Georgia, for 8 straight years after Mark Richt's first 7, was telling themselves, we're only a few pieces away. We only got to beat Florida and Alabama. We can get over the hump, and they never were able to do that. They do the same thing with James Franklin. Oh, James Franklin didn't have everything necessary to beat Ohio State and Michigan. Now, all of a sudden, he does? Look at the record. You are what your record says you are. We've seen coaches win with a lot less. Kalen DeBoer beat Dan Lanning twice his final season at Washington. He got Washington to the national championship game. Washington doesn't have nowhere near the resources as what Penn State has. Washington didn't recruit nowhere near the level that Penn State has under James Franklin. And yet, Kalen DeBoer in 2 seasons at UW turned that program into a national championship finalist. And yet, we still keep making these excuses about James Franklin. Look, James Franklin is a good guy. He's the kind of coach that you will want to marry your daughter. Just like Pastor Mark Richt. Mark Richt was an outstanding human being. That's probably why it took Georgia a lot longer to fire him than what it should have had, because he's just too nice of a guy to fire, just like James Franklin. But eventually, rubber meets the road, and Penn State is going to realize at the end of this season that James Franklin has a ceiling that he has already reached. Look, you are not going to have an easier path to winning a national championship if you're Penn State as what you did last season. You lost to Oregon in the Big Ten championship game and got blessed with your first 2 CFP games being a home game against SMU and Boise State in, the second round. Meanwhile, Oregon, they win the Big Ten championship, and what do they get as their consolation prize? Oh, they get Ohio State off a bye. James Franklin is a good coach, not a great coach. And what's holding him back from being a great coach is that he can't beat the two most important teams that Penn State has to play in the Big Ten. Just like how Mark Richt was a good coach until it was time to beat Alabama and Florida. And he just couldn't get it done. And when Georgia rolled the dice and they moved on from Mark Richt, because the thing with James Franklin is, well, he's a good coach. It's so hard to move on from a coach that consistently wins 10 games. Mark Richt had 10-win seasons for 10 out of the 15 years he was at Georgia. But you see, Georgia moved on from him, and they upgraded with Kirby Smart. Now, I'm not saying that it's a guarantee that Penn State will find their Kirby Smart if they fire James Franklin, if things don't go right this year and they don't live up to the high level of expectations that they have. But eventually, you have to take that risk because James Franklin has been at Happy Valley for over a decade, and you still get the same results. Nobody takes you seriously when you're playing Michigan and Ohio State. There are three things that are guaranteed in this life: death, taxes, and James Franklin getting owned by Ohio State and Michigan. And nothing's going to change. You can add all the receivers you want to. You can spend as much NIL money as what you want to, but you still have the biggest problem holding you back in your program, which is James Franklin. Just like Georgia did with Mark Richt. Mark Richt had so many great teams. He had Matthew Stafford. He had A.J. Green, and still couldn't win a national championship. I see James Franklin in the same way I see Mark Richt. He is the new Mark Richt of this new era of college football. He's a good coach, but not great. And that's why Penn State will continue to come up short. And that's why they once again will underachieve. There is not a Big Two in college football. It is the SEC and then everybody else. The Big Ten is the most overhyped conference in college football right now. This is a 4-team conference. Oregon, Penn State, Ohio State, and Michigan are the only 4 teams that are consistently good in the Big Ten. Now, occasionally, you'll have a team like Indiana that comes out of nowhere. Nobody expects them to be good, and then they rattle off a historically good season in their program history, and then you just have a bunch of mid after. The Big Ten does not have the same depth as what the SEC does. The middle of the pack teams outside of their top 4 are Illinois, who is occasionally a pretty consistent program with Brett Bielema being their head coach. He's pretty solid. He'll give you the occasional 9-10 win season every other 3 years. Nebraska hasn't been good since the beginning of time. Since I came out the womb, Nebraska has been dreadful. Iowa, their defense scores more points than their offense. Iowa is an embarrassment to college football. I don't know how Iowa even has fans. How can you watch 3 hours of nothing but great defense and good special teams and zero offense? Iowa fans have my respect. Rutgers, at best, they're a 7-win team. At worst, they consistently are a bottom feeder in the Big Ten. Minnesota, with PJ Fleck, they had their moment of fame back in 2019, 2020, that's it. They're just a consistent 6, 7, maybe 8-win team at their best on a good year. Wisconsin, they have really fallen off. They're not good at all. Lou Fickell, he's on the hot seat. He has one of the hottest seats in college football right now. And Michigan State, ever since Kenneth Walker left, they haven't been the same. Meanwhile, you look at the SEC, it's more than just Georgia, Texas, and Alabama, LSU. You got Oklahoma, who's considered to be a blue blood of this sport. Oklahoma gets judged off last season when that was the worst season that Oklahoma football has had in over 2-3 decades. The chances of Oklahoma becoming what Nebraska is in the Big Ten and the SEC is incredibly low, especially with the amount of resources and money that they had to invest in the NIL, buying guys out of high school, buying guys in the portal. Oklahoma will be perfectly fine. Ole Miss is having their best stretch of football ever under Lane Kiffin. Missouri has had consecutive back-to-back 10-win seasons. Tennessee on the good year is good enough to be not just a playoff team, but a potential national championship contender. South Carolina, Shane Beamer is one of the most underrated coaches in college football. Nobody gets you ready for a big game better than Shane Beamer as an underdog. Texas A&M, they got the potential to be a national title contender. It's all about, can they actually produce the results on the field? But when you just look at the middle portion of the SEC, we didn't even get the teams like Florida or Auburn that have a lot of upside. It's just better football being played in the SEC outside of the top teams in the conference compared to the Big Ten, which has been a 4-team race for the last 2 decades. The majority of the best quarterbacks in college football play in the SEC. As I said earlier, there's not a bunch of offense being played in the Big Ten. The Big Ten's best returning quarterback this year is Drew Aller. I've never seen such a perfect head coach and quarterback duo than Drew Aller and James Franklin. Why? Because they are both heavily overrated. Drew Aller has never put together a good game against any quality team that Penn State has played on their schedule. Luke Altmaier is the second best returning quarterback that the Big Ten has. Come on now. He couldn't even cut that Ole Miss, but he has improved a lot, so I'll give him that. If they had a most improved player of the year award, it would have gone to Luke Altmaier last year, because at one point, he was unwatchable. So he's a pretty good quarterback, but to be honest, I would take Luke Altmaier over Drew Aller. That may be a hot take, but at least Luke Altmaier shows up in big games compared to Drew Aller relative to the amount of talent that Illinois gives Luke Altmaier to throw the football to. Dylan Raiola, the Patrick Mahomes from Timu, he has a lot of potential. He's pretty good. Damon Williams from Washington, he's going to be something special. Think Jaden Daniels, but a lot smaller. Julian Sand at Ohio State, you see, he doesn't count because Ohio State, unlike the rest of this conference, knows what a good quarterback looks like. Dante Moore at Oregon, he's going to be pretty good. But the SEC, you got Lenore Sellers, who you can make the argument is the best quarterback in the SEC. This brother single-handedly won South Carolina games against Clemson, Missouri. This is Cam Newton reincarnated in a younger body. You got Garrett Nussmeier. Say what you want to about his second half implosions. This brother can rip that football. Not only does he have an incredible arm, but this guy is a gamer. He had a lot of yards that he was racking up at LSU last year. He's better than any other quarterback in the Big Ten right now. Would you rather have Drew Aller or Garrett Nussmeier? I'm taking Garrett Nussmeier. Any given Saturday, I want Nussmeier over Drew Aller. DJ Lagway, 12-9, never got more hype. Arch Manning, of course, we know the nepotism behind his last name. John Mateer, he was a baller at Washington State. All of these quarterbacks would start over Drew Aller and Luke Altmaier. It's not even close when you look at the quarterback play in the SEC compared to the Big Ten. And then the NFL, they tell you everything you need to know about which conference they rather have players drafted from. The SEC, the NFL wants SEC players. It shows it in the stats. 15 first-round picks in this past year's draft were SEC players. The SEC had 9 different teams with a first-round player selected. The NFL only cares about players from Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, and Oregon out of the Big Ten. Nobody else outside of those top 4 teams is getting drafted in the first round. The SEC has had more top 10 picks in the last 16 years than any other conference combined. The Big Ten is tied in second with the Big 12 at 28 top 10 picks. The SEC has 61. The NFL wants SEC players for a reason, because they know if you want to give your team the best shot at winning at the highest level in the NFL, you get players from the best conference in college football. Georgia literally won the Philadelphia Eagles a Super Bowl. They literally have nothing but Georgia and Alabama players on their squad. That's why they won the Super Bowl. It's no surprise. It's no surprise. When you assemble a team from the two best programs in college football, of course you're going to have a lot of success. College football runs through the SEC. Big Ten fans and college football fans don't want to admit it because they hate that the SEC is just better than everybody else. They want to believe that there is a level playing field. I want to believe that. I want to believe that the Big 12, the ACC, they have a shot at knocking off anybody in the SEC outside the Mississippi State and Kentucky, because they're just miserable. But if you were to put those teams in the Big Ten with the amount of mid-offense that's played, I promise you they have much more success, because the conference is more weak in depth compared to the SEC. The SEC is like the Royal Rumble. If you watch WWE, you know what the Royal Rumble is. You got like 40, 50 people, and the last man standing gets the main event spot at WrestleMania. That's what the SEC is. It's the Wild Wild West. There's a reason why the Big Ten has only had two different teams win a national championship out of this conference in the last decade. Outside of Michigan and Ohio State, it's Penn State, who hasn't won a national championship since the fucking 80s. The SEC, meanwhile, yeah, they haven't won a national championship the past 2 years. That's because they wanted to give the Big Ten the opportunity to win one. They wanted to give the rest of college football and college football fans a break from dominating the sport. It's not as if the SEC didn't win the last 4 straight national championships with 3 different teams prior to Ohio State and Michigan State finally winning theirs. The SEC since 2000 has won 15 national championships. That doesn't even include Texas and Oklahoma. People, there is no Big 2 in college football. It's the SEC and then everybody else. There's a reason why Greg Sankey is coming off like he's Satan. Because the SEC runs college football. It's not about head-to-head. It's about what have you put into the NFL? How well are you recruiting? And what does history tell us about the SEC? They are just better than everybody else. They have more high-level teams in their conference. Even their middle-of-the-pack teams are better than the middle-of-the-pack teams in the Big Ten. Indiana, the only quality team they played was Ohio State. We saw what happened to Indiana when they went up against Notre Dame in the first round. They got belt to ass. And Curt Cignetti is a really good coach. But when you are playing in the SEC, you put Indiana in the SEC, they become Vanderbilt. Oklahoma had a down season because they were a Big Ten team their first year in the SEC. You can't win in the SEC like you're Iowa. All defense, relying on great special teams with 0 to no offense. You can't win that way in the SEC. You put Iowa and Kirk Ferentz in the SEC, they don't even reach bowl eligibility in this conference. Like, the amount of depth top to bottom in the SEC trumps the Big Ten. On-field results aside, like, the squirrel finds the nut every once in a while. Oh, okay, sometimes you got to give a dog a bone. And that's what the SEC is doing. They just don't want to burn out their audience. They want to make it entertaining for everybody else. So if the Big Ten wins their 3rd straight national title, it's more than likely going to be either Ohio State, Penn State, or Oregon, because those are the only 3 teams that consistently matter. Meanwhile, in the Big Ten, since 2010, they've had 4 different national championships. Come on now. Are you forgetting about 2010 Auburn with Cam Newton? When's the last time the Big Ten had a quarterback anywhere as good as what Cam Newton was in 2010? Come on now. Like, the best players in high school want to play in the SEC. 7 out of the top 10 recruiting classes from 2025 were SEC schools. Do you know who were the only 3 Big Ten teams that finished with top 10 recruiting classes this past cycle? Take a guess. I'm pretty sure you already know. Ohio State, Michigan, and Oregon. Recruits rather play at Auburn. Can you even tell me what Auburn is in Alabama? Is that a city or something like that? Recruits rather play at Auburn, coming off a 5-win season, rather than playing at Penn State. Come on now. The recruits, the NFL, the history shows everybody who truly runs college football. So let's stop living in this lie that it's the Big Two. It's the SEC and the Big Ten. No, that is a lie. It's the SEC and then everybody else. And if you disagree, let me remind you who has won more championships than any other conference since the year 2000. Who has had more first-round draft picks in the last 16 years than everybody else? Who has had the more top 25 recruiting classes than any other conference? It is the SEC. Ding, ding, ding. If you answer that question with that answer, you got it right. Because the SEC is college football. Ohio State doesn't really belong in the Big Ten. They should be playing in the SEC. If you take Ohio State out of the Big Ten, you have nothing but what Michigan did with Jim Harbaugh. Ohio State and Michigan are the only 2 programs that have consistently been in the national championship conversation. Thank you, God, that they killed the Pac-12, because if you didn't get USC or Oregon, this conference will grow incredibly boring and stale fairly quickly. But in the SEC, even without Texas and Oklahoma, it still is the wild, wild west. There is no Big Two. It's the SEC, and everybody else comes after.